It's that time. It's unprecedented, and it certainly is. We're here at the intersection of law, politics, the United States Supreme Court. Dina Sayegdal, Michael Popok, our weekly show where we cover it cover to cover what's going on at the United States Supreme Court. And boy, is my head spinning from all the developments there. We purposely did our show a little bit later in the week to pick up some of the evolving stories, let them land, let those planes land, so we could give you our best guess of what happened, our best opinion and commentary, and what's going to happen next. We're going to talk about the United States Supreme Court, not just that they refused to block the sentencing for Donald Trump that's already happened in New York. We got a couple of videos up, including the audio up here on Legal AF, the YouTube channel, for those that are interested, but how the 5-4 vote came to be. Who's in the 5? What does it signal potentially for the rest of 2025's term and beyond, in terms of who is stepping forward and the voting? It's right alongside of things that we've talked about with the rise of Amy Coney Barrett. I'll just tease it that way. So it's important that they rejected him, but how they counted to 5 is equally as important for me, Dina, moving forward. And we'll talk about that along with the other reporting in that particular segment about why is Sam Alito picking up the phone call for Donald Trump the day that he's also has business before the court on an emergency application to try to stop his sentencing. Isn't that the day you tell your receptionist, I'm not in? I'm not in if Trump calls, as opposed to picking up the call. It's all this Supreme Court, especially Alito and Thomas, where they don't even ask for forgiveness instead of permission. They don't ask for permission. They violate the ethical rules, and they don't really ask for forgiveness either. It's just telling the American people, go pound sand. We are preeminent. We are eminent. And we are infallible. Like, we have 9 popes, or at least 3 of them. We're going to talk more about the Sam Alito phone call and what it signals for the future if he doesn't retire. Then the TikTok case is all in the news. We're going to have a fiery debate between Dina and me about what the hour-long oral argument today signaled about whether the ban Congress ordered, Joe Biden signed it, requiring divestiture by the 19th of January, the sell-off by ByteDance of its TikTok unit to a non-Chinese owner because of national security crises. I know there's also a lot of people who love TikTok. Somebody actually came out when I was talking about this case with you last week and said, it's obvious that Popok doesn't like the platform, and that's why he's rendering his opinions this way. And I got news for you. I love the platform. I think it's a great platform. I just don't want it to be a Trojan horse for the Chinese government. And that was the argument today by at least the government side of the equation. And so an interesting thing broke out. We'll talk about, Dina, when Kavanaugh started suggesting, well, what if Donald Trump just refuses to enforce the law when he gets in, which was on everybody's mind when a week ago, Justice Roberts in his end of the year report said that one of the biggest threats to democracy and to the justice system is people flouting laws and flouting rules and not following them. And what do you do about it? So I don't think it was an idle question. I think it shows you what's going on in the stew of that brain of Kavanaugh. We'll talk more about TikTok and whether Dina feels that they're going to enforce the ban and make the sale happen, or they're not. Is First Amendment speech going to prevail, so to speak? Mm-hmm. And then we got an interesting case that happens every couple of years where the United States Supreme Court sits not as an appellate court, not an appeals court doing review, but has original jurisdiction to be a trial court for very unique things like suits between states. And we got Alabama versus California. No, it's not a new country hit coming out of Nashville. It is a real case with real implications that touch on things like the wildfires in LA and beyond. And we'll talk about it here on Unprecedented. Well, enough about me, though, there in the intro. Let's turn it over to you, Dina. First of all, I know you're in California, and I want to make sure that you and your family are safe. How's it going for you guys out there?
I mean, it's tough. Los Angeles is this big, sprawling city, but it is a small town right now. Everybody I've talked to knows somebody who has lost a home, or more than one person who has lost their home, knows multiple people who have been evacuated. My daughter and my sister were really close to the fires. I mean, it's toxic. The air is toxic everywhere. The town is reeling, and we're not over yet. They're expecting more, next week. So it's a tough moment right now for people who are living here.
And you know what we're not doing on this show? we're not blaming diversity hires
Mhm.
or Gavin Newsom or Mayor Bass or a water issue or reallocation of resources to make cheap political points while people are literally losing all of their worldly possessions, are leaving running cars in the middle of the street. We even have our friend and podcast partner and founder of Midas Touch, Ben Meiselas, is like he and his family are constantly, they're running away from the flames as we speak. And I'm glad you with the good vantage point of being there, but being safe, can talk about that. Shout out to, of
Mhm.
course, and our deep support for all those Midas Mighty and legal AFers who are in harm's way. And on that, so let's transition. There's no good segue out of that. Let's transition
Oh.
from that into the Supreme Court. Why don't you take it from what happened at the United States Supreme Court,
Mhm.
which I think was a surprise to Donald Trump, and how close the vote was. And then I can kind of give you my view of what the 5-4 means and get your view on that.
Well, the 5-4 is actually what stood out with me too, because, I was pretty upfront on social media about how I thought this should come down. There was no reason for the Supreme Court to stop the sentencing. The three things that they were asked to look at, one of them was the evidentiary issue, which we had talked about. They are still going to see that after the sentencing. He's going to appeal that. No reason to rush in now and do it. Interlocutory appeal. The trial's already done. There's no harm. One of the other things they had to look at was whether or not this president-elect had like a special immunity. The fact is, Justice Merchan already said there was going to be no consequence. So they're not going to step in and look at this really difficult issue unless they have to, right? So there was very obvious that the Supreme Court had no legal reason to step in at this moment. They might still overturn his conviction based on that evidentiary issue at some point. That's not what this was. This was just stop the sentencing. The fact that it wasn't a 9-0 opinion shows us how really detached, I guess, let's say, this current Supreme Court is from the typical way the Supreme Court uses their role as the court and deciding law and looking at precedent. Because there was, so frankly, that was the bigger surprise to me, that it wasn't 9-0, that they had these four justices come to terms with it. And I think you kind of alluded to this, the breakdown. And it is interesting, the pivot, the strong pivot Justice Kavanaugh has done. His first year when he was on the court, he ruled along with the majority in every single opinion. He towed the line. He came off this really difficult, as we know, confirmation hearing. Justice Bader Ginsburg assigned him the opinion when she had the authority, because she was trying to kind of bring him into the fold. And there was this idea that maybe Justice Kavanaugh, who was seen at the time as probably moderate, would be more akin to Chief Justice Roberts and being a swing vote type person. Lately, we see him really pivoting away from that. Justice Kavanaugh, I think I've said in our prior episodes, bothers me even more than Alito and Thomas, because he takes opinions solely based on his personal opinion, I think, and not even based on some sort of doctrine, right? He talks about states' rights when it helps him and states' rights when it hurts him. He's not consistent in any way. But anyway, so I think that was the takeaway for me, was the split, the fact that there were four justices willing to stop a sentencing in this particular example was really disturbing.
Yeah, for me, the 5-4 decision, as I think I said in a hot take, I thought it was never going to go 9-0. Alito and Thomas and now Gorsuch have created an unholy troika of on these issues, especially about the presidency, where Gorsuch has become a reliable vote on the alt-right of the court. So I always had those three always over there. The question was it going to be 6-3 or 5-4? And what I said was Amy Coney Barrett we'd have to aim for Amy Coney Barrett. And all Supreme Court advocates that go before the Supreme Court now have to, on most cases, aim for Amy Coney Barrett, who has become the centrist, right centrist, but centrist on the court in a more reliable way than Chief Justice Roberts has ever been, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, especially since the summer I guess from the Dobbs decision forward, it's really been he's been unreliable to protect democracy. So you aim for Amy Coney Barrett, who we'll also talk about during the TikTok segment today and the role that she's playing. She, therefore, I think, was able to convince Roberts, not the other way around, to go over with with what I call the Democratic wing of the Supreme Court, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. We knew they were always going to be there for not stopping this garden variety sentencing, criminal sentencing at an interlocutory intermediate stage before the record had even been complete, or the appellate process had even been exhausted in New York. We knew that. And we knew the other three were over here. The question was, and I said, is Amy Coney Barrett going to be able to get Kavanaugh and or Roberts over? And I said it would probably be Roberts. Why? Because Roberts, I think, is thinking better of what his immunity decision did. He never really thought through what his immunity decision historically, from a judicial precedent and how it's been interpreted since, would be would what it would accomplish. There's been people that have told me, insiders that know him, that he's been shocked at the reaction to the immunity decision. And I think he was not going to try to touch that third rail of the immunity decision again and help Donald Trump again if he could help it. And this was not one that went to the core of the immunity decision anyway, because Donald Trump had already admitted and conceded in prior filings that his core conspiracy actions in the Stormy Daniels hush money cover-up case were not covered by immunity. He had no immunity for those because he wasn't president.
Yeah.
They were only fighting over these narrow, discrete strands of evidence about whether they somehow violated an aspect of the immunity decision. It's very narrow. I'll tell you what the 5-4 did not adopt. There's no such thing as presidential elect immunity. You don't get immunity in the remaining countdown to the inauguration. That's out the door. They also, and I think the credit goes to Justice Merchan. He made his sentencing, I think, Supreme Court proof, because he tipped his hand last Friday and told the world he's not putting Donald Trump in jail. Mm-hmm. And so in the order from the Supreme Court, the 5-4, meaning this is how they got the fifth vote, or the fourth to fifth vote, is they announced, well, what's the impediment? What's the impairment? What's the prejudice? You're not going to jail. Mm-hmm. So they specifically called out as a third rationale for not granting it this Merchan devised method of giving him a sentence without a sentence. Mm-hmm. For me, the 5-4 proves to me what you and I have been talking about since we started Unprecedented. Watch for the rise of Amy Coney Barrett. Over time, the first year or two, it was like, well, she's not talking much, not writing much. A couple of cases she popped up here and there. Last term, we saw her spread her wings, take on Alito and Thomas in concurrences, if not in actual dissents, join with the three, sometimes in a losing effort of the three other women. We thought there might be this kind of women relationship that's developing among them. They're the only women on the court. And that would just naturally lead to some natural affinities. Maybe that's happening. She's not where I want her to be as a true centrist, like let's say a Sandra Day O'Connor or something like that, or even a Kennedy. She's more right of that, but she is going to be the target audience for most advocates now at the United States Supreme Court, because she seems to have intellectual heft and some stick-to-itiveness and ability to lobby and get people over to her side. She's quickly becoming the swing vote. And Roberts, I did not think he was going to dive back into the immunity decision again to help Donald Trump and be labeled a Trump enabler for the second time.
Yeah, especially because it's not yet. This evidentiary rule that he kind of alluded to in his immunity, which was you can't introduce evidence that would be kind of stemming from an immune official conduct. He wants to see that flushed out in the appellate court, because frankly, he probably doesn't even know yet how he wants that to look. So I think, they may still decide, right, that some of the evidence that was introduced shouldn't have been introduced, but they don't have that record at this point. And I think that's why, I understand we shouldn't expect that right wing justices to do the same thing. But that's why it is still like legally shocking that they did not do 9-0, because nothing precludes them from still overturning this. But the record wasn't even close to them being able to review it. And the fact that Justice Merchan, I mean, people are outraged that Justice Merchan said that there was going to be actually no real sentence. But that's why the Supreme Court did this.
Yeah,
Because why create a whole new president-elect immunity for literally zero sentence? So
exactly.
those
Agreed.
4 justices were going out on a limb to say
Agreed.
they wanted to delay sentencing. There was nothing in this that
But
legally.
Kavanaugh's revealed himself again. You
Yeah.
can't count on Kavanaugh. He'll swing mostly with the other three where he can, and that's why Amy Coney Barrett's so important. When she
Yeah.
sides with them, it's a 6-3. When she can cajole one of them to follow her, it's 5-4. Even if she joins the three in the Democratic wing, it's not enough to win. You can only count to four. To count to five, she's got to be able to bring somebody over with her. And on different issues, it may be different people. I mean, even Gorsuch, sometimes depending upon issues related to gay, LGBTQ plus positions and some other positions,
Mhm.
sometimes he comes out more moderate. But on key presidential separation of powers, immunity, he's firmly entrenched on the far, far right of the court. And that's just the way it is. Let's,
Mhm.
Alito,
Oh
another
yeah.
scandal with Alito. Alito picks it. What'd you think about the phone call and the
Uh,
propriety of it?
it was so incredibly corrupt. So incredibly corrupt, and why, frankly, so many people are upset, and kind of leads into my TikTok argument too. That, you know, there's a lot of reason not to trust. I mean, this is partly, I think, why Trump won, is because he harnesses this idea that people believe there's corruption at levels of our government. And that part is not completely false. It's just the Democrats and Republicans have vastly different ways of trying to solve that corruption. But I, it was he knew his I he, okay. Alito tried to say, he's like, well, he hadn't filed the petition yet. Well, you knew he was going to file it. You had somebody who had litigation before your court around immunity. He was getting sentenced in a criminal case. You knew he was bringing this argument up on the lower court. You knew this was going to come before you. No other situation would a judge, a state court judge, a federal court judge, allow an ex parte communication. That's essentially what it is, a communication between the judge and a party in the case. That just would not happen. And this idea that he was giving like a reference, oh, so ridiculous. Write a letter, send an email. That's basically what everybody else does. The fact that you would have to speak one-on-one to the president-elect about this, so outside the realm of reasonableness. I mean, do you really think we're all stupid? So corrupt. I'm as a lawyer, like, that's so unethical. I'm just beside myself with it, to be honest.
I see judges. I got cases. Cases pending before them, at like a cocktail party or a fundraiser. A nod. I say, Judge, how you doing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even small talk. I don't want to be making small talk because I don't want to be accused of doing an ex parte communication. But
Yeah.
this is the problem with this court in Alito, and we'll see how much longer he stays. If he, all eyes are on he and Thomas to see if they're going to resign. I don't think so. I think Alito likes being a Supreme Court justice, and I don't. I think they're going to have a hard time pulling him out, at least in the first 2 years. Let's turn to TikTok. The drivers for the TikTok hearing today, and just to bring people up to speed, to remind them, Congress and the Biden administration signed it, is requiring that, and they're enforcing it, that ByteDance, which is ultimately owned and controlled by the Chinese government, to sell TikTok to a non-Chinese owner in order for TikTok not to be used and weaponized by the Chinese government ultimately, and to protect national security. The other side of the coin is First Amendment. Got content creators that are like, I like TikTok.
I
I'm
love
not
it.
trying to,
Yeah.
right. I'm not trying to, not just you. I'm not trying to undermine national security. I just want to show you my new dance moves or my new legal commentary or how to make an omelet in 2 seconds or whatever the heck is on there. So I get it. But the question is, does the government have the right under national security grounds to violate, 140 million people who like using TikTok and for First Amendment purposes. There was a oral argument today. It was basically led by a little bit of Amy Coney Barrett, a little bit of Kavanaugh, a little bit of Kagan. And you and I may have two different takeaways about how we think this court's going to rule. And they're going to rule quick just to keep everybody, we don't have to wait 3-4 months. That, unless it's blocked, and they haven't blocked it yet. They didn't even block it off the oral argument, although the weekend they could try something. But on the 19th of January, the day before the inauguration, a date picked on purpose, that's when the forced sale has to happen. If even with that coming and going, that 19th, the question that Kavanaugh raised is, well, what if they don't? What if they don't do it? And Trump's already indicated that he doesn't want to go after them. Then what? And that led to a very interesting debate between our current Solicitor General, Liz Proliger, and Kavanaugh. Why don't you catch us up, and then I'll jump in with my opinion.
Oh, goodness. This was a very spirited oral argument. As a journalist and just big defender of the First Amendment, I'm really opposed to this ban. Also, a takeaway, kind of a broader takeaway from me listening to this is, frankly, the justices don't know enough about TikTok. They may not have ever been on it. Justice Sotomayor was talking about, but can't they find your contacts and get, I'm sorry, but that cat is out the bag. The TikTok lawyer was like, a Chinese owned e-commerce site that has 70 million users basically harvests all the same data as TikTok. And,
you're talking about WeChat?
No, not WeChat. It was Temu. Temu sells things, but it can harvest their location. It can harvest your addresses.
It's a good answer, by the way.
Yeah,
and WeChat also. They've been using WeChat for 20 years.
Yeah. And I think that this is what you were talking about, using it for 20 years. This is if we are too late. And they don't know enough. They were talking about the algorithm. What's the big deal? Can't they just open source a new algorithm? I'm sorry, but the algorithm is the company. It is the asset. I mean, look at what happened to Musk. He changed the algorithm. It completely changed the social media platform. They didn't quite get that. And AI is coming, folks. And we are not ready. We're not ready to pass laws on it. We're not ready to judicially review laws on it. So that was kind of like an umbrella thing was, this data collection. Americans, I'm sorry, we're voluntarily giving our data to people all over the world. If our country doesn't like it, they should have been figuring this out a long time ago. AI is coming, folks. You guys need to figure this out because we can't be looking at this in 30 years and trying to backdate it. So anyway, that was kind of an overall thing is we're just not up to speed. Our laws aren't up to speed on tech. But in terms of the First Amendment thing, basically the government is trying to say that, content manipulation, covert content manipulation by the Chinese government is bad, plus this data collection thing. But they're trying to say that content manipulation is not governing speech. And I think all of the justices really disagreed with that statement. They were like, you are clearly governing that algorithm because it's coming from China. That is a way of moderating speech. Justice Sotomayor said, because the Solicitor General tried to argue that people using TikTok don't realize that the Chinese is governing the algorithm. And Justice Sotomayor was like, I don't know if anybody believes that now, right? People understand that TikTok is owned by the Chinese government. We've heard this. And then she said, the Solicitor General said, China is just trying to get, Americans to argue with each other, which, again, if you're going into content, you don't like the way the content is being disseminated, let's say, that is a protected First Amendment right. Content users have a First Amendment right. TikTok as a U.S. subsidiary has First Amendment rights, and then you have to apply strict scrutiny. And the strict scrutiny would say that you don't just do an outright ban, you do a lesser included thing such as disclosures. The TikTok lawyer tried to say, well, why not just make it illegal for TikTok to share their information of US citizens for anything. So it was interesting hearing the Solicitor General really try to argue that they didn't like the fact that the Chinese government can control the dissemination of information, but yet that wasn't a control of speech. And the last sentence by the TikTok lawyer, which I resonated with me, said, "You cannot restrict speech to protect free speech." And I think that is going to be the tricky part. I think nobody likes the idea of data being sent to China. There's a national security agreement that governs this, has governed this for years. The justices could talk about how to use that, maybe increase that restrictions. But at the end of the day, how do they allow this ban without restricting speech? And to me, I thought all of the justices were really grappling with that, grappling with the argument that somehow fundamentally the government didn't like China having this algorithm, which was possibly manipulating content.
That's why people come to unprecedented, because I'm gonna respectfully disagree. My takeaway is they're going to enforce this ban. I think Amy Coney Barrett again is going to lead the way. She asked the lawyer point blank at one point, which I thought was a very telling question. Why are you fighting so hard about this divestiture? She literally said that.
Mhm.
Like, why are you fighting so hard on this? Just sell it out, and then we don't have this problem. Kavanaugh gave another opening, which is we enforce the ban, but Donald Trump doesn't execute on it, because even Liz Proliger, the Solicitor General, had to admit in questioning from Kavanaugh, well, what happens if he doesn't want to enforce it? We know Donald Trump's position, because just to remind everybody, Donald Trump lobbed in an unsolicited amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, about 2 weeks ago, and said, well, do people want to know my opinion? And I'm thinking, not really. Well, like, I'm the president-elect. Don't you know what? I'm not in favor of the ban. And if you just give me more time after I come in and stay this, I will work it out with some business solution, because I'm the great I'm the great deal maker. And we're all like, oh, here he goes. He's going to try to buy it for Truth Social. They did not respond to that. That did not come up during the oral argument, but it could, by the way of Kavanaugh's question, which is, well, what if Trump doesn't want to enforce it? He gets in on the 20th. The 19th comes and goes. ByteDance doesn't sell. Then what? And she had to admit that the enforcement of that law is in the hands of the executive branch. Now, that means the American people would have to go to court, like on a writ of mandamus, to force the president or the executive branch to enforce the laws of Congress. We know Congress isn't going to do it, because it's in the hands of MAGA, although it was in the hands of MAGA when they banned, they forced the sale to begin with. I think they, based on the questions and the ping pong ball bouncing around, I think they will side ultimately with the government that there are greater national security concerns with the potential weaponization of this, what I refer to as the Trojan horse, and in the hands of our, basically our enemy. Let's be frank. You can call China what you want, but it's the enemy of the American people. And we already know there's plenty of data of. I mean, as we're speaking, they're hacking into our cell phone systems, our Treasury Department systems, our algorithms, our servers, everywhere, Chinese, in order to, and also to sow discontent and misinformation and disinformation. I think they do that. I think they stand up for Congress. This is a law of Congress. They find that the First Amendment needs to give way under certain limited circumstances to the higher calling of national security. That test has been met. I know the content creators were like, our First Amendment rights, but the issue is, see, they can put that on another platform.
But they shouldn't have to. And like the Solicitor General just
you make
said,
the assumption, but wait, you make the assumption that in order for you to come to your position, you have to not believe the government that the Chinese are weaponizing TikTok, right?
Well, here's the thing. Is the Solicitor General only said things like they had the capacity, they had the potential. The government hasn't proven that they are taking this data and using it to weaponize. And they are allowed to give us propaganda. I mean, that is democracy. It is
allowed by who? The Chinese don't have a First Amendment right.
Okay, well, no, but if they have a US subsidiary, like Politico is owned by Germany. It's here in the US. They could say,
so it's owned by the German government?
Yeah. Did you know that? It came up in the oral argument today.
Politico is owned by the German government?
I didn't realize that either. Yeah, substantially at least. Like at least a majority owned by the German government.
Well, at least they're allies.
But my point is that if it is a US-based company, they do have First Amendment rights. And also a US writer for Politico, like as I'm, able to publish, I have a right of publishing. I have the right to listen. We have First Amendment rights to receive information.
What if the name of the platform was the Chinese Communist Party platform, and they needed a legal analyst, and your videos were doing well there? Is that okay?
So you're talking about like in China or here in the US?
Here in the US. It's called the Chinese Communist Party platform.
Okay,
or Al Jazeera, US.
Al Jazeera, I mean, they give great info. Justice Kagan here in, Justice Kagan gave an example, actually, pretty much what you're saying. In the 1950s, when people were worried about the US Communist Party, and they had affiliations with Russia, and they had like propaganda, phrases that they were disseminating to communists. If the US was shutting down the US Communist Party for their speech, that would be considered content-based restrictions that would require strict scrutiny. So they are saying, it's not like you can't surpass strict scrutiny, but you do have a threshold of strict scrutiny once you are regulating the content of speech.
Is the government getting over that threshold in their arguments?
No, because his point, this is what they're going to decide, right? Because I do think they're going to say this is content-based restrictions and have strict scrutiny. I think the questions of the Solicitor General is they thought it was far-fetched to say that we're worried about China manipulating the algorithm, but yet it's not content-based manipulation. I felt like all of their questionings kind of dismissed that. TikTok said if you were worried about that, then one, you give a disclosure so people realize that this could be. And also
the trolls are going to label themselves. Okay.
Well, you know what? We have a right as US citizens. If we want to go out and look at, we have a right to get propaganda if we want. I know it doesn't sound good, but that is First Amendment rights. It's the burning of the flag. Some people think that's very offensive.
That's not the question here for me. But I don't mean to interrupt you. That's not no. I'm not saying that's not the question here for me.
Oh. Well, anyway, they said the less restrictive means was making it illegal to share the data with anybody, like prison sentence, like instead of banning it outright. And frankly,
we have shut down RTTV, Russian television TV. We shut down RTTV because it under national security interests. And they're being prosecuted, including the money that they gave to a podcast company in Kentucky, and which they then spouted. You do cross the line from First Amendment and just propaganda to national security violations.
Was that dealing with the broadcast license, or they were online streaming?
Oh, I don't remember which one.
Because broadcast licenses also came up during the whole argument, and they were saying how that's different because there's a limited amount of broadcast license. And so they do by law restrict foreign broadcasts.
So before we get sued by Germany, Politico is owned by Axel Springer SE, which is owned by a German billionaire and is publicly traded in Germany. It's not owned by the German government.
Okay, well, the TikTok lawyer today used Politico as an example of a government German government owned. So I was just quoting him. I doubt he would be completely wrong.
Well, let's see. Axel Springer is owned by Klaus Michael Kuhn, a German billionaire, majority holder, significant stake in the company and its original co-founders, and it's publicly traded. No. So, but anyway, it's not. I think he was trying to come up with an analogy and like
Yeah.
go, well, the Germans own Politico, but not the Germans, just
Yeah. I
German
mean, he
people.
used BBC also, which I do think is a state owned,
Yeah,
but he did say Politico. So I'm glad you
yeah.
corrected it. But bottom line is, it's really more about American rights, First Amendment rights, and American rights. I mean, here's the thing: if they shut down 170 million people who really enjoy using, I mean, the TikTok platform, and I mean, I go on TikTok all the time. I mean, I'm on TikTok all the time. I have
I'm
huge
not
videos
against
on it.
TikTok.
But
I just
you
side with the
have to
government on
be
the
a little
national
bit. I
security.
think you honestly have to be a little bit against TikTok to
Me?
think it needs. Well, no, not you, but the
Uh-oh.
idea of it, because I actually think TikTok is the best platform to find out like the pulse of what Americans are thinking. Right now, Zuckerberg controls Facebook, Musk controls X. If so the Supreme Court says that this isn't allowed, and Trump does allow some billionaire to buy TikTok, we are so much worse off in having these social media platforms being held by these billionaires. Whereas right now, TikTok is like jumping through hoops to keep it safe because they know that they can get shut down. So they have Oracle monitoring our data. Our data is probably more safe on TikTok than it is like on our
Yeah,
insurance
I
companies
got
where they
great
have the
news for
info.
all the TikTokers, including you.
What's the
They're
news?
going to ban it. They're going to allow the ban to take place. Trump is not going to enforce it. And that's going to be the end of the story. He's not
Okay.
going to have the Department of Justice shut down ByteDance. He's going to ignore it. And then we'll have lawsuits that you and I can report on
Yeah.
about
Well,
whether he had to enforce it or not.
this came up too though, because it's not just TikTok, it's all of the the carriers that allow TikTok to basically be used, and those carriers are going to be so worried about getting sued.
Like what
And
carriers? Like what?
I mean, that's what they refer to
Like
as
the App
carriers.
Store?
Yeah, the App
Got
Store.
it.
And also, in order for it to function, like,
Yeah.
are they going to allow it on, I don't even know how all these things work, but the cellular data networks. So Justice Sotomayor alluded to that because he asked, you know, basically Justice Kavanaugh was like, can others rely? Let's say Trump says, I'm not going to force it. Can they rely on that? And then Solicitor General kind of hedged. She said, we never looked into this. Justice Sotomayor picked up on that later in the argument. And she said, what is the statute of limitations? And the Solicitor General said 5 years, which goes after the Trump administration. So I think that put everybody on notice that even if Trump doesn't enforce the law, all these other carriers are not going to allow TikTok to happen, because even if Trump's okay with it, the next administration could enforce the fact that they
Yeah.
illegally allowed TikTok to happen.
Yeah. I love this debate.
I mean, I think
I could
I
go all
feel
day.
so strongly about it. Like I
Yeah.
said, I feel like
I'm more agnostic. I'm not against.
it's
I'm
very
agnostic.
paternalistic. It's exactly why people don't like the government. It's paternalistic. We want to protect you. Like, I'm sorry, but we are voluntarily giving up our data. That's on us a little bit. And then B, even if I don't see any propaganda ever on TikTok, but if so, I also think, hey, that's an American right. And offensive, like Justice Gorsuch brought up, he's like, isn't the idea of if you have offensive speech, the answer is counter speech? Because the government in their briefing was like, oh, it's criticizing our leaders. Well, in a democracy, we're allowed to criticize our leaders. And so to me, this is like a really dangerous precedent, because we might feel happy about it because Biden signed it. But that next time Trump, or the next worst Trump, tries to restrict the speech of 170 million Americans, we don't want to look to this opinion. This could be a very bad precedent.
I don't think the Biden administration is trying to restrict speech. I think the Biden administration, in good faith, and Congress at the time, believes that the TikTok operated by the Communist Chinese Party, which is what it is, ByteDance is just a straw man, is a national security risk. It's a national security risk, not because of they don't like mean tweets and mean TikToks videos against them, but because of the data collection and mining and ways that our enemy can use that. If this wasn't our enemy, we are at war with China. I don't know if people realize this. We are at war with China. We are at war with Russia. We are at war with Iran. And you can fill in the blank with some of the others. And we are allowing a warring enemy, economic military enemy, to operate a platform that they have or can use. I don't know what examples were used in terms of undermining our not our First Amendment rights, our national security. And that's the debate. And that's why you're over here and I'm over here, and there's not a lot of overlap because I buy that the government has the right to ban assets from being owned by our enemies that could be or are being used against us. And you're in favor of unfettered First Amendment speech, no matter who owns the platform, because 170 million people can't be wrong. And that's sort of where we're at, right? We're going to see what the
Yeah,
Supreme Court
I mean,
does.
I see the national security issue. I think
Yeah.
they've addressed it by Oracle monitoring it. And I
Yeah.
also think they're not banning Chinese owned e-commerce sites. So I do think they're not being
Mhm.
consistent, which shows they really are trying to protect
Mhm.
this speech, which is worrisome. And yes, it was Biden and we trust Biden. But the fact of the matter is, if this happens, are you really going to trust Trump or the next MAGA person who wants to shut down a social media company from doing that? It is a very
Mhm.
dangerous precedent.
All right. Well, we will see. We'll see who's right. We'll report back dutifully on unprecedented. We only have a couple of minutes. You want to do a very quickie on Alabama and
Yes.
California?
Okay, really quick. So basically, because this is a tie into the wildfires, California in 2023, under Gavin Newsom, sued these big oil companies like Exxon, BP, saying that you have lied to the consumer for over 50 years about the dangers of your product and have caused climate change damage and specifically have made our state have to pay things like wildfire expenses, etc., because of your lies. It's very similar to like the lawsuits against the tobacco companies who also knew the dangers of cigarettes and lied to their consumers about it. Well, this lawsuit is still going up the courts in the state of California. But Alabama and other Republican states are trying to stop it because they're saying if California is successful, it is going to harm their state because they're going to lose tax revenue because of the fact that the companies will lose money or go out of business, the gas stations, the same. So the Supreme Court has very limited original jurisdiction, which means it's very limited when they take a case let's say at first sight and not through the typical appellate route. Alabama is asking the Supreme Court to take this as an original jurisdiction, to remove the case essentially from the state California court because they're worried the California state court is going to be more favorable for the California lawsuit and asking the Supreme Court, who we've talked about all along here is very extreme, very MAGA, very pro-business, certainly not going to be friendly to California trying to protect its environment. So that's where we're at. The two have kind of briefed the issue of whether or not they should take it. The Supreme Court should really say that Alabama doesn't have standing. Standing means, are you the party to bring this lawsuit? Because the two parties with the most interest in a lawsuit is the ones who should bring the lawsuit, right? Because otherwise, you can't argue your interests as well. Somebody else should bring the lawsuit instead, who's like more directly affected. So the fact that Alabama, I mean, what business is it of theirs? Whether or not big oil is basically, operating illegally in the state of California, as California says, like big oil should just answer that question itself in California, and Alabama way over there should not be able to answer to it. So they're trying to bring in this tax revenue as a standing. It's very important, not just for this particular case, but this is going to give us a preview. If the Supreme Court allows this to happen, we are going to see this is how the red states are going to try to stop the blue states from progressing. So very interesting case to follow, very timely. If ever, it is devastating what's happening here in Los Angeles in the state of California. And there are players, there are companies affecting our climate. And so something here the state of California is trying to do to kind of answer for that. And are we surprised? Of course, we're not surprised that Alabama and the Republican states are trying to stop it and asking the Supreme Court to step in.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And let's leave it there. We'll pick back up on the United States Supreme Court sitting in a trial mode rather than appellate mode. When we come back next week on Unprecedented, lots to talk about, lots of new cases that are being argued, a very, as you said, very hot bench we've seen. And more importantly, we've seen how the various voting blocks are coalescing on the court, which is important to Supreme Court advocates and commentators like you and me, so we can help give a reasoned opinion about how things are going to turn out. And the rise of Amy Coney Barrett is going to be a continuing story. Like it or not, she's become the right centrist on the court. In fact, right as I was sort of preparing for this, I found a Newsweek article just from a few minutes ago, and the headline is Amy Coney Barrett sparks MAGA fury over Trump sentencing decision. I have a long day of recording. And because they're mad because she slid over and did exactly what all 9 should have done. But we'll continue to follow it all. Dina, stay safe with your family, all your loved ones that are, 1 degree separated from this tragic fire. Turns out part of it was arson. Hard to believe that a human being is responsible for so much devastation and loss. But we'll continue to follow it and give our hopes and prayers and thoughts to our legal AFers, Midas Mighty, and those that follow us who are out in harm's way. So until our next Unprecedented, Michael Popak and Dina Sayek signing off. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.